Greetings and namaste. This is Shiva, your friendly neighborhood wellness guide and co-creator in this journey of wellness for all. Well, here we are. It's been a bit of a hiatus, but know that I've been up to some tricks. I will reveal some of that in due course. But for today, I'm trying to do a twofer. So I am also studying for a master's in education, and as part of the coursework, I try to incorporate a lot of wellness themes and motifs, even though the coursework is technically and traditionally aimed at teaching in a K-12 environment. However, I feel wellness needs to be an integral part of that environment, so I kind of put my own wellness spin on the topics, the readings, the discussions, the activities, the assignments, and the interactions with my peers and teachers to really bring it out of that box of, classroom education, hunkering down and studying, within the context of a certain book or the guidelines of a certain subject. I try to make it more life aligned, kind of more resonant with what we might encounter on a day-to-day basis. So, the inspiration for today's topic comes from one of the coursework prompts that basically focuses on failing. And I've got these prompts written down here just as a roadmap so you kind of know where we're going with this. So if you can see here, prompt number 1 is to define failing. Basically, construct a definition, and we'll go through that. After that, we will basically, if I can squint my eyes and look at this thing, look at what challenges cause students to fail. So this is more of a school scenario, but like I said, we'll pepper in something that is resonant with a broader audience, because at a certain level, we're all students of life. We're learning as we go. Number 3 is how to turn these challenges into joy and learning success. Right? So that's the solution space. And just some notes, although the third point is more kind of teacher-driven, is what teachers can do. I think we're also self-teachers. So think about it in that sense when I hit on this point. And lastly, we have does some of this need to be age appropriate? So if from a school context, obviously at the elementary level, at the middle school level, at the high school level, do some of these techniques change, or does the focus change, or the weightage of different things change? So that's what we've got, right? I'll keep that here, and let's get into defining failing. So failings. It's been an eventful road for me personally to understand what failing means and what role does it play in my life. Why does it show up in the way and in the timing that it does? So let me first go back to maybe what I think is my earliest failure, or at least my recollection of it. And this is, little Shiva in 3rd grade, and I think I got either a failing grade or a not so good grade in a subject. I forget which one it was. Maybe it was Hindi, maybe it was civics. I recalled those as being, sort of not my favorite subjects at that point in time. But anyway, regardless, around that time, elementary Shiva got this not so good mark on his report card, and we had report cards that were, I think, generated every quarter maybe, and then the key ones were the ones that were semi-annual, and then there was an annual exam which had the results of the annual exam on that report card. So basically you've got these tests all along, and then you have the big tests at 6 months and the year. So I think that was the format. But coming back to the report card, so I get this not so glorious mark over there, and what do I decide to do? I decide to do something about it. I'm like, nope, I'm not showing this to mom and dad. And so I try and tweak it a little bit and make it seem as if it was a more impressive number than what it actually was. Long story short, I get found out pretty quickly, pretty easily, and of course that puts a premature end to what could have been a child prodigy in forgery, right? No more dreams of that, I guess, for me. But jibes aside, the question that came up for me was, why did I decide to do that? Why did I decide to change that number? And so one of the techniques that I used to rely quite frequently on during my quality assurance days, monitoring field performance of medical devices out in the field, was the 5 whys technique. And that is traditionally a quality control technique, a quality investigation technique, but I find it is very apt for getting to the root cause of essentially anything in life, almost, not just a quality defect of something that is coming out of a manufacturing plant. So let's maybe walk through the 5 whys on this one. So you kind of start with, why did Shiva, or why did I decide to change the number on the report card? And then I answer that. In my case, I didn't want mom and dad to know. And then, why did I not want mom and dad to know? Well, because they would not be happy with my score. And so that's the second why, right? For if you're keeping count. So now the third one, so why do I think they would not be happy with that score? Because if I don't get good grades, then I won't get a good job or be successful in life. So number 4, why is that? Because employers, for example, if you want to get a job, employers look at grades to understand whether what was taught in school is actually retained and understood by you. Oh, and why is that? Because employers feel that what you learn in school will help you succeed on the job. And so, that's the 5 whys, kind of gets down to this base layer. And that's quite a ways away from Shiva tweaking the report card, right? So you see kind of the power of where this led to, and what Shiva's brain at that point in time might have absorbed as why this is important to do and why this must be hidden. Well, there's more aspects to that, but let's go down this root cause rabbit hole, if you will, for a bit. So now what pops out for me is that at this very early age, the programming that I may not be directly receiving this, but what I am taking, what I'm absorbing from it is that failure is not celebrated. Far from it, right? It is a black mark. It will trip you up. And it is to be avoided at all costs. And the world at large wants you to succeed, and failure is not something they're interested in knowing about or finding any use for. So that's the programming piece, right? So then there's this fear of failing that is created for me, or that I self-create, co-create, however you want to call it. I'm not going to go too deep with the psychoanalysis right now. But I do not want to fail is sort of the driver. And I want to succeed is also the driver. And those two kind of play off of each other, in a sense that it's sort of more of a black and white relationship of, if I fail, I necessarily am not succeeding. And if I succeed, I necessarily have not failed. And personally, that's been part of the perfectionist cross I've carried for a while, and still do. I'm a recovering perfectionist. But while this fear of failure, helped me, in my college, for example. So fast forward into college, and I'm doing engineering, and I've been through a couple of bumps in the road of specifically academic failure here, and at that point in your life, that's pretty much a big chunk of what succeeding in life means, especially growing up in India in a society that really prioritized, and a city that really prioritized education, especially the sciences. If you weren't a doctor or engineer, hey, go fly a kite. You ain't really good for nothing. But when I was in engineering college, this fear of failure helped me come up with success strategies. For example, I would go to my seniors and I'd say, hey, can I borrow some books from you? Hey, what's the deal with this professor? What kind of questions might he be setting? And I'd go into the library and research old papers, what questions were set there, and so I'd be looking at not just one book but multiple books. So I'm sort of hedging my bets, and I'm also doing this sort of targeted, what's the kind of real meat of this subject or this exam that might be coming up for me. And that really stood me in good stead. I eventually topped, most of my semesters, internal and external, and I certainly topped my class at the end of the 4 years in engineering college, which was awesome. But there was still this fear of failure. Despite being an engineer, and engineering traditionally, especially as I came into the work environment and hobnobbed with different personalities, and also came to America, and they had a different learning style. Silicon Valley was by nature, sort of creative, risk-taking, innovative, entrepreneurial, and this whole notion of fear, really, I could really see it clearly now. It was like, So fear actually prevents me from taking risk. Fear actually prevents me from recognizing that failure is also learning. It's knowing maybe what not to do, or it's knowing if I do X, the result is Y. Although I want results Z, and Y is not close to Z necessarily, I still now know I have another, bit of know-how that X and Y are related, and here's how I can get from one to the other. And now, although the goal of the moment is to find the path to Z, I can do that. But I can stick this nugget, let's say, this failure nugget in my back pocket. So as I kind of went down the road of life, I found, and this is not just in work or study, I found this across different areas, like I alluded to, my relationships, my health, investments, money, that when I failed in something, I learned something. And there's hardly any failure in life that is like completely a cul-de-sac. It's like you're done. It's almost nothing that's like that, right? So when I got divorced, for example, I had to introspect. I had to reflect on what was my role in that, and how would I avoid that going forward? Because I did have plans to remarry, and I did. And, God, blessed as I am, I've got 2 munchkins to show for that second marriage that I thoroughly enjoy. They might make an appearance at some point because their mom's kind of in a meeting right now, and they're supposed to get a hold of me if they want something. But even when it came to my health, for example, when my health took a downslide, I was kind of working long hours, burning the candle at both ends. Health took a dive. I was missing a workout just to complete this extra assignment or whatnot, or, get this project out of the weeds. I knew that what I was doing had a direct consequence on how I was feeling. So all I had to do is recognize that my health is failing, and then I simply had to take some steps that had maybe stood me in good stead in the past, whether it was adequate rest, whether it was proper nutrition, whether it was just doing things that gave me joy and meaning and wiped away the stress. And even though I wasn't spending as much clock time on it, the time I did spend on it was with much more energy, with much more focus, with much more productivity, because I wasn't just like, grunting away trying to get it done. So failing kind of is a great teacher. And I would even argue that it is sometimes a better teacher than success is, because when you fail, well, you've fallen down. Now you need to know how to pick yourself up, and that's a life skill that is simply, it is something that should be inculcated from the get-go. It is a non-negotiable life skill, because everyone falls at some point or the other, and if you don't know how to get back up, or if you don't know that there's a process where you can figure that out, oh boy, it just makes that so much harder and longer. So in that sense, I think failure is a great teacher. Also, when one needs to get back up, you can't always resort to the old ways, because maybe you fell a different way, maybe you fell in a different area of life. Like I mentioned, my divorce. It wasn't as if I had gotten divorced before. I had to kind of figure out, okay, I had to put on, creative hat. I had to put on an accountability hat. I had to put on a metaphysical hat, because I went down the Jyotish route, the astrology route, to figure out, okay, how can I harmonize the energies that my future partner and I bring to the table to get us to as good a start as we can get. We owe it to the both of us and any lives that we have a hand in creating, bringing into this world. So failure helped turn around that whole notion into something that was life-affirming and that was growth-oriented, that was abundance-oriented, right? So what would be a definition of failing? So if I go back to my third grade self, it would probably be failure is the lack of success, or failure is the biggest roadblock to success, and failing is something to be avoided at all costs. And if for some reason one should fail, it should be quickly swept under the carpet, lest it be blown out of proportion, perhaps, and be associated with the person, and therefore become a part of their image, or be a label for that person. This person is a failure, or so-and-so failed at, subject X. However, now, if you ask me now what my definition of failure is, you kind of have a clue of that. It would be, and this kind of comes from a quote, so pardon my ad-libbing there. Failure at its best is a catalyst for growth and creativity. And when misunderstood, can deeply and adversely impact one's self-worth, one's identity and self-esteem. So I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but you kind of get the gist, right? It's failure needs to be embraced with the perspective of success, because it is simply a stepping stone on the path to learning, to success, to that greater goal. How are we doing so far? All right, failing defined, right? Kind of there. Of course, I'll write this down, maybe publish that, and it'll be a little crisper there. Okay, point 2. What challenges cause students to fail? Kind of touched on this, I think, in terms of challenges. The challenge is that students are sponges, right? And I'll maybe pepper in the age pieces here too. The younger we are, the less our beliefs are formed, or they're in the process of forming. And we're still in a state of influence. As one gets to maybe a teenage age, some of those beliefs have already been well rooted, and they're there. Whether they're they're serving beliefs, or beliefs that don't serve, or whether they're beliefs that serve in certain contexts and not in others, whether they're beliefs that serve short term versus long term. there's sort of this gradual setting of beliefs over time. So for that reason, I believe the earlier one learns to escape or avoid, or not even escape or avoid, pardon me, just scratch that, right? The earlier one learns to recognize the trap of failure being something to be avoided, being something purely negative, the better it is. So, learning to ride a bike. So I'm teaching my son, for example, right? He's 7 right now. I'm saying, hey, it's first time without training wheels. I'm saying, hey, you might fall. You likely will fall. Because I fell, I told him my story about falling in a rose bush when I was learning how to bike back in the day. And you might fall, might hurt you. So be aware of that, and be safe as well, because falling is also something one needs to know. I've roller skated too, and biked, and I kind of like doing some parkour type stuff. So falling is sort of pretty important. And so I sort of conditioned him to the fact that he should expect to fall. That's part of the process of learning, but just be, as safe as possible, and fall in a way that he can get back up and continue the learning piece. Not fall in a way where, he's out of commission for a week because he sprained his leg or ankle or whatever, or injured himself, bruised himself. So when one approaches failure from that perspective, that it's an integral part of the learning process, you just need to kind of keep your head out for it. And there's certain things that you do not do just from a safety perspective. It takes longer to recover from certain errors than other errors. So make the small mistakes maybe, if you can. So once one understands that, it's not an issue if I fall. I'm not a less of a boy or a man. It's just part of the process. But the important thing is I didn't fall that hard that I couldn't get back up. And if I did fall that hard, well, I've learned something, that the maneuver I was trying was not for me, or the safety move that I tried was not appropriate for preventing that injury or that mishap, and so on and so forth. So the challenge that students face, I think, is just all of this focus around failure is evil, and that becomes a deep-seated, as in my case, fear of taking risk, a fear of even showing up and participating. I mean, just think about all the introverts and, some of the less gregarious people out there. What if it is not simply introversion, but a fear of failure, of being mocked, of being laughed at, made fun of, and kids, even young kids, as early as preschool, are capable of dressing down the other. They are capable of saying really nasty things. So that could be a fear of simply taking action, of doing stuff. And I think that's a key challenge that needs to be addressed in schools, is this climate of failure. How can failure be repurposed so it is a normal part of the learning process? And maybe as a teacher, if I'm teaching, say, yoga, for instance, I might get into a pose and say, when I first started this thing, this was how I was doing it. Bad idea. I either injured myself or I kept struggling with it for years, and, or whatever the case might be, right? And I never got it. And so that's showing them that I might be at a certain level today, but hey, I have some scars to show for it. And I have some lessons I've learned as a result. And taking away this fear, this stigma of failure really helps share those stories, helps create those deeper connections of, yes, I'm human, look at me, I screwed up. And then the story continues of how did I turn the ship around and what did I learn? And even if I didn't turn the ship around, what did I do to not slip on that banana peel again, Other than that, I think just generally in a more school context, what causes students to fail is maybe the workload is too much. They're not getting adequate support at home. Maybe their style of learning is such that is not being addressed in class. There's auditory learners, there's visual learners, there's kinesthetic learners, and we're all really a mix of at least these three. And there's multiple types of intelligences, and so we basically are unique cognitive beings, and there's no one size fits all. However, the school system is geared towards mass production, and that is more of a one size fits all. And then you have some forks where some students get some additional help, others go for, like in India, tuitions were really popular, not just for struggling students, but also students who wanted to excel above and beyond the classroom. So both the advanced learners and the learners who are being challenged at a certain level both get help to rise one is brought up and the other one is allowed to rocket off to wherever they need to go, while average student kind of stays average, gets by. But I think there's the challenge, right? As the systems are not set up for individual learning, and that's just a matter of scale. There's not enough bodies or dollars or money, to use a more general term, to take each student through a very individualized learning experience. So the best one can do is, have a class size that is fairly, that allows time for individual attention, but yet takes the group along as well. There's other systems like the Montessori system where you have mixed ages, so one can potentially, like an advanced learner in second grade can potentially hook up with a third or even a fourth grade student to get a little more challenged as to their level. And so it's not really an age-related thing in that sense. It's more a interest and capability and performance-related pairing, if you will. It's kind of touched on some solutions there too, didn't I? But yeah, to turn these challenges into success, I think it's really a concerted effort by not just the teacher knowing the student, knowing their strengths, knowing their opportunities, not trying to fit those square pegs into round holes. If this person is like an idea person and they're not good with their hands, why are you trying to force them to be a carpenter? Just don't do it. Help them design furniture. Don't have them make it as such. Have them observe people. They might learn by observing, but they just don't have the physical dexterity to, do what is required to put stuff together. But when they observe other people, they can learn and they can kind of say, what if we put this and that together? And vice versa. The guys who are, athletic and good in sports, don't overload them with calculus, or if you do, then make it, put a concerted effort into making it relatable to them, understanding how they might learn the best, not just the cookie cutter approach, learn it the way everyone else is learning, because they're not like everyone else. So as a teacher, and as a wellness guide, that's the reason I kind of chose the line I did, is because I feel everyone needs to be honored in of themselves first before the larger context of, family, society, community, whatever, country, nation, globe, planet Earth, cosmos can be honored. You have to kind of start from the inside out. So knowing the student as much as is possible, maybe partnering with other teachers to kind of share the burden, share the load, not the burden, that's not a good word, but share the discovery, share the insights, and then, first teacher, the 𝘭𝘢 teacher might say, oh, I've noticed this about, so-and-so, and I might say, oh, really? I haven't noticed that in class. Maybe it's this particular thing that gets them going. And those are some of the discussions where teachers can kind of learn from each other's observations and experiences with a given student. Lastly, age appropriateness. There's definitely neurological changes that occur, right? So, for example, like I said, there's this funny thing where a younger child does not have a certain amount of fear just because they haven't tried enough things and they don't know cause and effect. And you go all the way to teenagers, they sort of have the same thing where their frontal cortex isn't fully developed, so they're not as risk averse. They can take more risks. They're willing to hit the gas on the car, even though they just learned to drive. And they're willing to, try a smoke. Or they're willing to not study until the last moment and do an all-nighter, pull an all-nighter for the exam. I can raise my hand for that one many times. So you have the strange thing, like I said, when you're really young or you're at that teenage level where when you're young, you don't know what you don't know. And when you're a teenager, you basically don't care, even though you might know. And that gets you doing things that are in the zone of potentially failing, but they're also in the zone of doing something completely unseen or untried or completely new. So there's that thin line, and I think that's what needs to be cultivated in this middle ground of, don't forget, when you were little, this is how you learned. And this is maybe what you discovered. So don't be afraid of taking some risks. So sort of incorporating, almost designing in elements of failure, setting them up for these little failures that they can recover from in a creative, innovative way that, oh, this happened, how will you get over this? What are some other ways to get over this? Is something that needs to be really stressed in those middle years when one is really kind of playing it safe for the most part, right? So, yeah, I think those are my thoughts for today. I'll have my work cut out for me in terms of putting this down on paper, but you guys don't worry about that for now. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Let's put some failure out there. Here's a big hand for failure. And on to more learning. And every failure is a step closer to success. On that note, Shiva signing off. Wellness for all.